Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald! Around the body. Jazz up!
He's off from inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal from inside the centre. Fuck! I can't believe it.
Good time of day, everyone. This is episode number 232 of Americans Watching the Footy, our round 4 recap. I am Benjamin Castle coming to you from San Diego, and my house smells brilliantly right now because I was caramelizing a bunch of onions.
I'm Ethan Castle coming to you from South San Francisco. Brian Harambe's right next to me. I think he smells pretty good. He doesn't fart like he did when he was super young.
Oh gosh, I remember that. The only time he ends up smelling like onions is during Hanukkah, when the smell of onions from making latkes just permeates every single cell of everything. So, well, I had my spring break from my student teaching this past week. It was nice to be able to get a bit of a reset there. Parents came down to see me, went to a Padres game with them. All was good. This is a round where I think we're going to be talking about our teams not that much at all.
Yeah, either of our teams played in the most captivating games, but I do think, since we aren't doing preview episodes for the time being, I think we just need to make up for that, since there won't be a preview for the next round, by just playing the gather round sound as much as possible.
But yeah, don't worry, we'll hit that a bunch because it is gather round next up, and that's going to be glorious. Whether you're at the Adelaide Oval, the suburbs in Norwood, or wine country, the Lions deserve a game at Adelaide Oval. I don't think we need to waste any more time. On Thursday, over 82,000 saw Collingwood 8-15-63 defeat Carlton 6-10-46. This game had juice up until, middle of the third quarter when we realized, Collingwood were running away with this a little bit anyway. I mean, could have really put on the hurt, but they kicked 4-6 in the third quarter. Was up against just a single point. Gratifying part about this game, the voters got it right. For once, it wasn't, Josh Dacos must have been best star grab. He had the most disposals for the winning side.
No, they gave it to Lachie Schultz, who, by the way, it should be mentioned, it being the
Richard Brant medal.
Yeah, really good on pressure again. It's funny because he's in a different role than he was in when he was at Freo. At Freo, he was kind of a distributor, showerhead type, I would say. Everything kind of flowed through him in some capacity. And he's taken on this role now as a pressure forward, kind of. And, let's be blunt about it, he was not good last year. He's been off to a very good start this year. And I think if we stop just comparing him to Jack Ginnivan, I think he'll do all right.
Of course, those comparisons won't stop because those are two teams that are in the news cycle, and they were, in essence, exchanged for one another. But Schultz with 2-1 from 18, 9 score involvements, 7 marks, 7 tackles, and 31 pressure acts. That's close to as good as you're going to get from Schultz, maybe barring having not converted one of his shots on goal. It's just the kind of style that Collingwood plays, I think, plays into his hands really well. He's not the only pressure guy, obviously, because Bo McCreary is Bo McCreary. But there's no one just king of the forward setup in Collingwood's lineup. It's, Brody Majacek has been the leading goal kicker for everything but last year when he was injured. But it's not like he is a guy that you see just absolutely dominating a lot of games. There's just a lot of really functional pieces there on the tall and the small ends together. And then you have players like Harry Perryman who can surge into that group. Perryman got his first goal as a pie added to the pressure law with his 8 tackles, which is why I brought him up in this conversation.
Other than this game kind of being the recognition that, hey, Lachie Schultz is actually pretty good, I wasn't blown away by anything Collingwood did. Most of my takeaways are just about how bad Carlton's been. It was not a very well played first half on either side. Collingwood cleaned up their game in the second half. Carlton was just pretty bad. Mitch McGovern is one of the players who looks like his talents have been sucked away by the Monstars this year.
I think we're putting Andrew McGrath up there, and
he's up there. And then there's a player who played on Friday night that's not far off either.
Ooh, foreshadowing. One thing I did notice early on was that Collingwood were successfully keeping the game away from Jacob Wiedering early on, just couldn't convert. He was left without a touch of the ball in the first quarter. He did end up getting a decent amount of things, 7 marks and 14 disposals, but it's the right game plan. He's going to be able to adjust, but just if you force Wiedering out of his element, if you force that back setup to adjust, then you're already winning in some ways. And they were getting some things over the top, succeeding from stoppage. You wouldn't expect this Carlton team to suffer as much from stoppage as they have, honestly. But Collingwood were +8 in stoppage clearances, and some of that showed. Again, it should have been more of a beatdown. A 17-point game in reality, when on expected score, it should have been more like 33.
Yeah, again, Collingwood did not finish in the first half, but they were pretty obviously the better team. And you mentioned the Wiedering thing, and I think that's one of the places where the lack of depth for the Blues really gets highlighted. It's bad enough that people are suggesting throwing Brody Kemp back as a defender next week, forgetting how bad he was in that role, because apparently the alternatives are even worse. I compare this to the Lions. The obvious strategy against Brisbane is don't kick it at Harris Andrews. But you're still dealing with some other pretty quality players. You're going to be testing like Jack Payne, Ryan Lester, etc.
Braden Starsmith, who can play above his size.
Against Carlton, who's the next defender up? I mean, more of McGovern's errors have been in ball handling, but he hasn't been great in one-on-ones either.
Well, if we just look to the VF, good Lord, what is that?
I know the VFL team lost.
Yeah, by 56. So that was after Southport took their foot off the gas. I believe somebody from Southport had 19 disposals in the first quarter. Yeah, Jacob Dawson, former Sun, had a footy to himself. Was nice to see Harry Mackay back in action in the VFL. Elijah Hollins played too. So help is on the way? ? Yikes.
So they did lead this game at halftime once again, but I didn't think it was out of their own doing. They should have been trailing and Collingwood just hadn't kicked straight.
Yeah, it was 3-7, 25 to 4-5, 29 at the half. Look, I never thought this was going to be a game where Carlton would shock everybody with a win. It would have been more Collingwood losing the game had Carlton won it, and Collingwood didn't lose it.
Interesting. On expected score, Carlton did have the halftime lead, and then third quarter expected score was 39-0. And in reality, it was, 30-0?
30-1.
Oh, I guess because the one was touched.
Yep.
Okay.
By the way, Collingwood had, this speed out of stoppage and stuff, despite fielding the oldest ever AFL lineup by average age. 28 years, 275 days. That was a very nice 69 days older than the Geelong lineup in the 2022 grand final.
Nice.
I mean, we know that the Pies can run in waves. We just didn't expect a lot of it to be this easy. How did you see the ruck matchup in this game? Because hit-out numbers were close to even. Tom de Koning had a couple more hit-outs to advantage, but I would still say Darcy Cameron had the more influential game.
Yeah, I would say so. I thought, de Koning was not bad, but he was not as good as he had been in a couple of the other games. And Darcy Cameron was the superior, all-around player. Even, if we go beyond just hit-outs, Cameron had the better full game impact, and he did a really good job neutralizing de Koning. And I think, if you have a versatile ruckman like that might not be the hit-out king, but can extend himself around the oval, that's where you're going to be able to minimize de Koning's impact. So I'm not entirely surprised.
I'm also trying to figure out with Carlton's gameplay is what exactly is the right role for Sam Walsh, because he was the highest ranking player on the ground in that respect with 31 disposals and 10 tackles. Oh, octopus. We haven't mentioned that this year.
Huh.
Yeah, 10 tackles, we call it octopus. I mean, you kind of hear it. But a very low number of contested possessions, just 8 compared to 21 uncontested. And, Hewitt is bearing the brunt of that, especially in the game where Patrick Cripps was struggling. I just would have liked to see Walsh be rotated directly into the guts a bit more just to see if that look could change things.
He came out on fire to start last season after he came off of his hamstring injury. And this year so far, he's just kind of been there.
You see why I'm hunting more, though.
Yeah. They're going to need more out of him and out of a bunch of other guys.
I mean, he's never been a super high contested player. Honestly, at the type of game that he had against Hawthorn was a little bit of an oddity in comparison that he actually had more. For his career, he's averaged about 10 contested, 17 uncontested per game. It's just something's got to change.
I mean, I usually expect him to get to double-digit contested possessions.
Then there's something there with maybe positioning at stoppage that I want to see fixed. Well, if he ever does get disillusioned with the Blues entirely, he is from Compton, I guess, and he was a Geelong Falcon, attended St. Joseph's College.
Gotta say, it's pretty funny that a couple of midfielders that you can mention as being from like regional Victoria, how much their stock has dropped between him and, if you want to segue, Clayton Oliver, but we're not going to segue just yet because we have a couple other things to discuss in relation to this game. What do you want to talk about first?
Are we talking about the actual game or game adjacent things?
Game adjacent things.
All right, here we go. So we found out that Sabrina Carpenter just reposts anything that involves one of her songs, and I guess one of those things was a post that Jack Brisk made on Instagram with one of his daughters, and she really liked it. She said, "She is precious." Pleading eyes emoji, white heart. This made my day.
It got me thinking, like, first off, did she know who he is? I mean, I assume she or whoever's running her social media, I'm sure they take the time to make sure that if she's not posting stuff from, like, I don't know, white supremacists. Second, does she realize that he's an athlete? I assume, you see the blue check mark. I think he's got a check mark on his page. Let me check. Yeah, he does. And you see, almost 100,000 followers, and you see him kind of following through on a kick and no file photo. I would think.
I mean, she had a huge couple concerts in Melbourne. I mean, it's a supporting act for Taylor Swift as well.
So my guess is, even if she doesn't see a photo of an AFL game and recognize, oh, that's Footy, she has definitely heard of it, because I am sure at the MCG, it was like, wow, this stadium's really big. What did they use it for? Like, there's no way that did not come up. So at the very least, even if she doesn't know what a mark is or what Collingwood is, she is aware of the sport's existence. I am fully confident in that statement. And I guess by association, then Taylor Swift has to at least have an idea of what Footy is too, just from having a show at the G.
Having multiple sold out shows there.
Yeah. Even if she never responded to Mason Cox's DMs, I feel pretty good about her being aware of what Footy is. It would be really funny to find out, like, someone you wouldn't expect is like a huge Footy fan, kind of like, the whole Timothy Chalamet, very deep college football knowledge thing.
Calling the Ohio University upset in the MAC championship game because of Parker Navarro.
Yes. Okay, I think this is one that, I don't know if I've mentioned, if we talked about Red Panda on a previous episode, did we?
I'm not sure, but I mean, I have imagined that because we've got enough NBA fans that listen to this, because of how big people are on the NBA in Australia, they probably know about Red Panda. Common halftime act, balances on a unicycle while kicking bowls up on top of her head.
First off, she lives in San Francisco. We need to get her to at least one USF game or high school game. Halftime act for the Bruce Mahoney game next year?
I love that idea.
Sorry, high school dance teams, you're not performing tonight. Red Panda's performing.
I mean, she literally lives in the Sunset District. She's very close to one of the schools involved in that game.
Second, I want to know, like, is she a basketball fan? Because it would be really funny if, she was performing at halftime at the Arkansas-Alabama game, and, like, someone should have interviewed her and asked, like, are you too busy focusing on your routine to actually watch the games, or are you a basketball fan? And, and then she drops something like, yeah, I love watching Grant Nelson. I was a huge fan when he was tearing up the Summit League at North Dakota State. Like, that is my dream scenario, is that, like, Red Panda watches mid-major and low-major basketball. Speaking of college basketball in Collingwood, Alex Condon's playing in the championship.
It'll have already happened in all likelihood based on editing Benjamin's schedule with class and everything. So congratulations, Alex Condon and Todd Golden.
Also, I had no idea Tyrese Proctor for Duke grew up in Sydney. American dad who had played it in Australia. Did not know that.
See, to me, that's... Sorry. Yeah, but they got humiliated by a late Houston comeback. Growing up in Sydney, he's probably more of a rugby guy.
So his dad played for the Sydney Kings, and he grew up playing cricket, soccer, and baseball before ending up going to strictly basketball. Went to Trinity Grammar School and then Lake Ginninderra College.
Yeah, that's the one that's associated with the NBA Global Academy in Canberra.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
I think that's where Giddy was and some of the other Australians that have come through. Yeah, this stuff is way cooler to me than, like, I don't know, Jason Tatum's dad being an NBL champion coach.
I mean, I think that stuff's cool too. Now, with college players, you get some NBA Global Academy, but you definitely see a lot going through the Center of Excellence.
Is that based on the AIS, Australian Institute of Sport?
Yes, it is.
Which is also in Canberra.
Okay. One last Collingwood Carlton related thing. Some guys were causing trouble in the stands and turned out they had guns.
Yeah. Security failure there. Failure to recognize the need to do a secondary check, and security presence has already increased at subsequent games. I know it's caused some delays, but you also imagine that they could easily respond to that by opening up the gates a bit earlier.
Yeah, I think within a couple weeks they'll have this under control. But like, as someone who has snuck like beverages into stadiums, because they're not as cool about things like that here. You can't just probably bring in like a gallon of chocolate milk like you can at the Adelaide Oval. I don't get how you could sneak in more than a couple of beers. Like, sneaking in a firearm seems like a really, really incredible breakdown in a lot of people's jobs and responsibilities.
I feel like this could very easily tread toward the start of clear bag policies and Australian venues in general, just following trends from elsewhere in the world.
I hope not. I like being able to bring a whole backpack into places.
Sometimes just not only because it's just easier to store certain things, but I don't know, I don't want everybody seeing my sign before I make it into the venue. Geelong and Melbourne, for once, were not on a Thursday. They were on a Friday instead, Cardinia Park. Geelong 12-13-85, defeating Melbourne 6-10-46. Hey, the exact same losing scoreline for both the Thursday and Friday games. Geelong had a patented late change, with Reece Stanley coming in for Mark Blitzovs, who was sick, and Reece Stanley reminded everybody that he's a Premiership ruck. That wasn't the full story of this game, but we want to make sure we acknowledge Premiership ruck Reece Stanley.
Hey, he did a good job. As someone who, like, last year thought he was Finnish, he ended up actually taking what should have been considered for one of the better marks this round and kicking a goal. And I think just the combo of having a fresh body, one of him or Sam DeConing, to match up with Max Dawn worked pretty well. Tom Atkins continues to set the tone with elite pressure. Ted Clohessy way better in his second full game than he was in his first. Jeremy Cameron had a higher work rate over the full ground. Bailey Smith was much better than last week. I don't think he necessarily set the world on fire, but he was good. Sean Manna's first game of the year, he had a bit of a rough first half and then improved. Really got into it second half, as was pointed out even before I could get on postgame live, thanks to the 8+ team of Brendan and Bianca. Bianca's no more than like maybe 12 years old, and she knows more about footy than most people, like most legit footy fans. Just one of the many reasons to turn into the Hoops Crew post-game live. Jack Bowes was actually pretty good, I thought.
He was one of the ones that you'd called out last week and were questioning about maybe resting, along with Lawson Humphreys, who shut you up.
Connor O'Sullivan, before he even got a game, Ryan Meyer said, like, that's a guy you give a 10-year contract to right away. Brian's going to be like a list manager or scout or something post-career. He's made that very clear, and he knows what the fuck he's talking about.
I mean, you don't just give a guy the number 14 jumper at Geelong for no reason whatsoever. I like how O'Sullivan started going a bit up onto the wing, but then when Jack Henry did his hamstring, that was no longer as viable, and he just had a really steady role in the back 50. Mature was the word that kept coming to mind to me when I was thinking about his game.
Like, as a key defender, he's going to need to keep kind of filling out his frame and add on some more muscle. Like, this next week without Jack Henry, it's probably the worst possible game to not have him. facing Riley Philthorpe and also Taylor Walker. That could be a challenge, but you do expect to have a healthy Blitzovs, which will at least help. I would think just off of size, he'd be the one that gets the Philthorpe challenge. But yeah, O'Sullivan did a great job. 23 disposals, 13 marks, 8 intercepts, 6 score involvements. And I really liked Ollie Dempsey. He ended up with 8 score involvements and 6 intercepts, half of his 26 disposals contested. And then Zach Guthrie just racked up really big numbers. Mark O'Connor was the sub who replaced Jack Henry, and maybe for a team that's struggled to really figure out how to master the sub role, since it became, something you didn't just have to do if someone got hurt, I think Mark O'Connor might be the guy to just do it like all the time.
I liked O'Connor in that role. I also liked O'Sheen Mullen with a cleaner game in the back. Those were both necessary, again, with the defensive changes that had to be made once Henry got injured. South Mega fan pointed out to us that O'Sheen Mullen is older than Bailey Smith by I think like 9 months or so, and that just felt like a total bending of the space-time continuum to me.
O'Sheen has caught more crap than almost any other player, and he's had some pretty lousy games. I thought he was good in the loss at Brisbane. I think just his style and where he is as a player right now fits wet weather footy. But this was like one of his cleaner games in better conditions. Another one who didn't set the world on fire in this game, although I did really like O'Sullivan and Dempsey and people who like big possession numbers like Zach Guthrie, who I think was pretty solid. But this is a step forward for O'Sheen, and it's a game that indicates he should be in there more and that the development is paying off instead of just sticking him in the twos.
The Patrick Dangerfield center half forward experiment continues to work, 3-2 from 20. He's always a card that you could pull into the midfield, and he's never going to be the most accurate. But I think he's been freed up of it to play more forward with Bailey Smith in there and with a better game out of Bose. And he did physically control the game at a few key times.
He did captain stuff, and so did Tom Atkins, who I don't know if Tom Atkins is at a place where he'll be receiving as many Brownlow votes. So far this year, Tom Atkins has been back into the form he was in 2022. Super high pressure, kind of playing like a captain, even though he's not. He's got 10 plus tackles in each of Geelong's first 4 games. He's regularly posting 30 plus pressure acts, and is a guy who I compared him to an NHL player with 4th line talent that hustles and works his way onto the 2nd line because he just works harder than every.
Is there a player that you could think of there?
There have been plenty of examples. A couple that come to mind for me would have been a Scott Nickel, although Scott Nickel was also super undersized. Daniel Winnick was another.
Thinking about former San Jose Sharks here because we're Sharks fans. Daniel Winnick also, I think, played for the Capitals for a bit. Congratulations to Alex Ovechkin on breaking the NHL regular season goals record.
I loved the Islanders tweet.
Yeah, wanted to just say Washington goal 2-1.
Yeah. And then they went on and, posted images and stuff congratulating him, but it was very funny.
Oh, the Islanders, still won the game. So perfect outcome for Isles fans who actually had tickets multiple months ago, not the ones who had to pay multiple thousands to be there.
The Giants lost tonight. Barry Bonds broke Hank Aaron's record.
We were there for a Giants win the next night when Bonds hit his final splash hit. But thinking about the Ovechkin record just makes me think about how it's so different between footy and American sports, where American sports have regular season and playoff records completely separate.
Which I think
out of it, it doesn't feel quite right to me. If we're going off that combining regular season and playoff goals, then Alex Ovechkin still trails Wayne Gretzky by 49. And then you also factor in the years that Gretzky and Gordie Howe had in the rival WHA, and really Gordie should have the record then. But you know what? When Wayne Gretzky got the NHL record in 1994, the Howe family acknowledged it really nicely, and the Gretzky family did very nice things for Ovechkin today.
Yeah, I get that for single season stat purposes, not including playoff stuff, but for career stats, playoff stuff should absolutely be included.
Back on to this Geelong-Melbourne game. We have to talk about Melbourne. Christian Petrarca's frustration says it all. They're 0-4 for the first time since 2012. They are now minus 102 for points in the fourth quarter this year. Even with a better game about Stephen May, where he was still whining like a little girl, it was to no avail. I mean, honestly, the most depressing part to me on an individual front is Bailey Fritsch, who just cannot find the goals right now. From 2021 to 2024, Bailey Fritsch kicked 193 goals to 94 behinds. What is he for the season now? I think 1 goal, 7.
Yeah, he's not quite on the level of Andrew McGrath or Mitch McGovern, but he's like a safe third for who's been Space Jammed the hardest.
Again, for me, it's the way I see it, it's kind of a depressing thing. 0-4 Melbourne, that's not fun. This was a team that you would hope would have stayed relevant for longer. And we can say some smaller positives about, like Tom Sparrow being able to quiet Max Holmes and Daniel Turner reminding us that he belongs in Melbourne's forward setup. I knew about him. I guess a lot of people didn't know about Turner, but overall, it's just not fun to watch them right now. They're not adjusting as their opponents are controlling things really well. They've got even Stephen May and Jake Lever, who, wasn't playing. They're damaged goods at this point, and I don't really see a defensive future for them. I talked about this last week, but it's still, extremely relevant. And Jacob Van Rooyen hasn't been getting into games as much this year, too. Even with Aiden Johnson out, he still hasn't done all that much.
One of the reasons I was not overjoyed with this game is because Melbourne was not good. But what was good? I mean, Petrarca was all right. Jake Bauer's been decent. Despite putting up numbers, I don't think anyone was impressed with Clayton Oliver.
That was an empty 30 there. And yeah, his stock has plummeted.
Whose perception has improved? Who has my perception of improved? Probably Turner and then Jake Bowie. I think Jake Bowie is no longer just guy who won his first however many games. It was 17?
I believe it was 17 matching his number. And Turner, again, that's just one game. We'll see what happens.
But as a whole, if this continues, and it totally could, Anzac Eve might be the sickos game of the year. But if this continues like it does, they need to replicate what Richmond did this offseason and just trade everybody, lean into the young guys. Because even without Xavier Lindsay this week and with a worst game from Harvey Langford, I like what their young guys have to offer. Talk to the older guys and ask, hey, who wants to stick around and spend the twilight of their careers rebuilding and priming a young core, and who would rather get traded and try to win another flag and lean into the next generation, because it doesn't as much as you could be, like a 2-3 win team for a couple years. I don't think this has to be a super long rebuild. I like what's coming up through the system.
And, they've done it before. You think about how quickly they were able to turn around from the disappointment of 2018, missing out on finals in 2020. They had all of Luke Jackson, Kazi Pickett, and Trent Rivers from that 2019 draft class all coming into their own in their second year over to the flag. By the way, Trent Rivers, I need to see more out of him in the middle because something's got to shift there. Clearances were even in this game, but they still haven't won clearances at all this year. And I also thought they were playing Langford too deeply at times. I'm just not enthused by the current setup. And as for guys who would be willing to stick around, maybe the defenders are willing to stick it out because they're on the older side and are already, again, with lengthy injury histories, out of the engine room. Maybe Jack Viney because he's a father's son, but his father's the general manager at North.
Richmond went through their fall pretty gracefully, all things considered. And, Hardwick going on his own terms, players getting their send-offs. This does not seem like it's going to be handled as cleanly. And I hope they can learn from that if they don't show in the next few weeks a reason to think hey, we've still got something here. Again, though, this team could have some real sickos games coming up, which I'm actually kind of looking forward to.
Well, we've got a sickos game for them this coming week because, we've got a double sickos dose on Saturday and gather round because 4 of the bottom 5 are going at it at the Adelaide Oval in that day-night doubleheader.
I don't feel as doom and gloom about Essendon as I do about those others. Do I think Essendon are great? No, but I see more of a path to them being decent.
Oh yeah, we have to talk about that briefly because they were on bye.
No, because it was a opening round bye, so we don't need to. Anzac Eve, West Coast the following week. Rematch with North round 18. Rematch with West Coast at Marvel round 21. All right, they only play Richmond the one time, huh? I'm looking forward to this just because sickos games that'll not include the same teams as the last few years. It's bad, then it makes their song way more fun when they actually win. Gold Coast 13-13-91 defeated Adelaide 14-6-90.
The mighty sun.
Adelaide, I'm getting you a promotion. I'm fucked. Yup, now you're fired.
Multiple things were true here. Umpiring was bad and hurt the Crows. There were more bad calls than just the Isaac Rankin one that I'm shocked the league actually came out instead of just saying it's a judgment call. I'm shocked they just came out and said, like, yeah, we got it wrong. Despite all of that, the Suns were the better team and deserved to win this game. I feel pretty confident about all of those statements.
And even though the AFL came out and said, that was an umpiring error, it should have been a mark, or if not that, a free kick against Sam Collins for the hold, that wasn't even the worst umpiring error in the game, because there was one on the very first goal. When it's your free kick and there's not an advantage being paid, you've got to be the one to kick, right? Well, apparently not if you're Matt Rowell and Connor Butterick.
Yeah, that was an egregious blown call that I couldn't believe. And you also had one later, I think it was it also in the fourth quarter where Jim Walter goaled in Nick Murray's absence. And then sure looked like Walter was playing on. Josh Worrell would have had him holding the ball. And instead, they said, no, he didn't play on. Go kick your goal. So if we're ranking the calls in terms of how egregious they are, the Rowell free kick one is the obvious number one. And then you could argue between this and the Rankin one.
And yet we still feel good about saying this felt more like a Suns win, umpire impact notwithstanding.
And it felt like a Suns win despite, I think, Adelaide having the bulk of the top individual performers between Riley Philthorpe, James Peatling. But Isaac Cumming was pretty good. But on a depth basis, clearly, Gold Coast was a superior team. Ben Ainsworth, 5 assists. Typical games out of Joe Anderson, Tuke Miller. Matt Rowell didn't get to 20 disposals, but still out of 17, he had 10 contested, 10 score involvements, 8 tackles in the game high, 36 pressure acts. Will Powell, also 17 disposals and 10 contested possessions. I guess you could call it the Powell-Rowell Power Hour. You remember the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour?
Those few Fairly Odd Parents, Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius crossover specials.
Yeah, I just saw a thing suggested the other day, why don't TV shows do crossovers anymore? Totally unrelated. I don't know if that was a nerd-stalgic video or what, but that just popped up. And then of the new Suns, Daniel Rioli did a great job kind of pushing the whole flow of the game forward. It reminds me of if you're watching a soccer game and you see that backline of defenders progressively move up and play closer and closer to the middle of the field and then eventually into the forward half. And then it's the entire team, everyone except for the goalie is in the forward half putting on pressure. I felt like he did some of that. John Noble, to a lesser extent, I thought he was kind of sloppy and inefficient, but I do like him. I just didn't think this was his best game, but he was still important in the structure of things.
This was a very Daniel Rioli game. 26, 18 of which were kicks, 6 marks, 6 tackles, and an assist. And really, it felt like he was being unmarked, exiting the back way too much. So a problem there in terms of forward 50 pressure for the Crows not being able to contain things as well, even with the pieces that the Suns have back there. Riley Philthorpe is now 1-2 when he kicks 5 goals.
I love that we were so right about him.
It would have been harder not to be right about him, given he was the second overall pick and really could have been first had it not been the academy rights stuff with Jamar Ugle-Hagan.
I guess the tougher one to be right on would have been Nathan O'Driscoll. Was it in Cairns or Tasmania, or where was it that he had first 5-goal game?
No, Cairns was where he kicked the winner over his head. It was a Launceston Anzac Day game against Hawthorn where Philthorpe kicked 5 straight on debut. The Crows kicked 16 goals, 3, and lost by 3.
Okay, so the footy Timothy Chalamet would be yeah, I've been a Riley Philthorpe fan since he kicked that goal over his head in Cairns.
Again, because he's picked 2, I'm not sure we could really make the comparison as well. It would be more like I've been a fan of Lawson Humphreys since he was in the Swan District's reserves, or I've been huge on Connor O'Sullivan since the first time I saw him play up for the Albury Tigers in the Ovens and Murray League. It was nice to see the spread of goals, by the way, from the Suns in this game. Out of their 13, nobody with more than 3, and that was Jed Walter, Will Graham with 2, Ethan Reed getting 1, Bailey Humphrey with 1. Fewer possessions, but still solid per play impact for him still. Like, the distribution of capable players on this team should come as a surprise. Maybe it's just, oh wow, it's all happening right now is the surprise. And Tuke Miller, forward of center, continues to work.
It's funny. I would think you just want to play him like behind center just because he's so good at long, accurate kicks.
But when you could get the run and carry from elsewhere,
I just think it's a role that isn't like the most obvious fit with his biggest strength. But it's working, so I'm not going to complain. It's just, it wasn't like the most obvious move, which is, again, I like when coaches do things that aren't the obvious move that, you know, dickhead sitting on his couch like me can figure out.
A lot of the stats for this game went the Crows' way in terms of the kind of mass of the game stats. The Suns were +7 inside 50s for the game, but more so for me, that meant that in the first half, they were conceding too much on the individual entries there. And for clearances for the game, the Crows were +11. You know, the combination of Peatling, Riken, and Saligo did quiet the Suns quartet for most of the proceedings, but the game was won elsewhere, which is maybe not something you'd expect. I'm also going to highlight the difference in the substitutions in this game. We don't do this a lot, but I've got a good reason. Firstly, I really like Jake Rogers' role as the substitute, just the dynamic mover there. And when Sam Closey wasn't doing much, Rogers definitely did provide a good spark. Meanwhile, for the Crows, firstly, I would have rather had Luke Nankervis in the full time. And secondly, subbing out Rory Laird for management purposes. Yes, it's a short week, but in a close game where you could still, you know, use him off halfback and maybe pushing into the middle to be able to relieve Riken or someone else for a bit. This felt like the first Rage Against Matthew Knicks situation for me this year. Even though they did get screwed by the umps, I don't like what Knicks did to manage the game.
I'm guessing it was something that was planned out before the game, like if nobody's hurt, this is how we're going to do it. Now, if it was my call, would have been probably either Borlace or Murphy.
The Borlace is tough because who do you get as that other tall opponent then?
Yes, but he was getting work. More than 16,000 at this game? Is it great? No, but it's an uptick. And if things are slowly but steadily growing on the Gold Coast, I think that is where you actually say the Gold Coast, you know, referring to the region.
You want to hate on the Suns for attendance? They had a crowd that was a little bit more than 75% bigger than the Giants had on Sunday for another afternoon game against an out-of-state opponent.
And that's nuts because GWS has had more sustained success.
And it's going to be the Giants' last game there for, I think, 6 weeks. And that still happened.
Also, Mac Andrew, 14 spoils? Is that right?
Got toyed with a bit in his one-on-ones, but had a couple wins near the end against Stilthorpe and then got him to his face.
All right, before we talk about the next Queensland team, since we're on the Queensland subject, I think it's the appropriate time for a new segment I like to call the part where we briefly talk about NRL, which I feel like needs like an intro. You're like, the part where we briefly talk about NRL.
Now we need to do it in just like the kind of the gruff sounding voice that seemingly every NRL broadcaster has. This is the part where we talk about the NRL.
That's an origin tackle.
Reece Walsh survived another game, I believe.
Yeah, I guess for some reason, Brisbane Broncos games, like 3 in a row, have been on American TV. Yeah, he once again made it through a game without getting badly maimed. Wests Tigers is just way too many consonants. Like it should be the Western Tigers or the West Tigers, not Wests. Also, one of the many things that the AFL has over the NRL, a lot of these NRL clubs keep like changing whatever they sing after wins and just like keep making up new songs and they don't even know them. Because I saw a video from like a week ago. I don't think it was this week because I think they lost. But like the Gold Coast Titans, they had a new song and it was to the point that like everyone was either looking at a piece of paper or looking at their phones to know the words. Like, that's not good.
I'm not sure who's consistent with that, aside from the Mighty Melbourne Storm tune that's set to the U.S. Marines hymn, and they doubled up Manly.
Real quick, other NRL observation I have. I saw a game ended on Golden Point, and I think that's actually very silly because Golden Point, 1 point, is it a drop goal or what is it?
I believe drop goals are just 1 point in rugby league.
So they never happen except for in that one super rare situation, which seems very silly. Basically, overtime is not played anywhere near the same conventions that you would play a regular game in. And that's silly. Like, even with like 3-on-3 overtime in the NHL, at least the fundamentals are still, you score the same way you do all the other times.
So you're thinking that it should be more just a set amount of extra time?
Yeah, either that or just scoring 1 point needs to be a more common thing. Because like this really doesn't match how the rest of the game is played. And that's just dumb. But I know we haven't seen live, extra time footy. But I can tell you at least that it's played the same way regular footy is largely. This is not how that goes. The strategy should fundamentally remain the same.
This was the part where we talk about the NRL. Richmond 13-12-90 defeated by the Brisbane Lions 18-10-118. This scoreline is a bit deceiving, but at the same time, I think there's more going on here than just the Lions taking their foot off the gas in the fourth quarter. Red time concerns still do remain. They're allowing some runs defensively far too easily. But having said that, even though the Lions haven't, played their best, I'd say, in any full game this year, they are 4-0.
On the endangered species scale, I would disagree with you and put this at least concern. I would be more concerned if the Lions were playing their absolute best right now and worry about them peaking too early. Instead, I just think, they have the shortest offseason. They're not perfect yet. They're still winning games. They're doing just fine. I have no reason to be concerned. Red time goals, I think that's just Chris Fagan knowing we can't get complacent. We need to hold ourselves to a high standard, and we need to find things to improve on, and that's what he's zeroed in on.
Perhaps it's more because it's an overarching concern year to year that it's on my radar a bit. I don't think it's a major concern yet, but the Dogs will definitely be more of a test this week out at Norwood. So that's going to be fun, especially for some teams that have some capable wingers too, with the lack of wings altogether at the parade fair.
Let's note, as we talk about the Lions, that they could have lost to Geelong, they could have lost to Sydney, and West Coast led them for a good chunk of the game. And they're still finding ways to win. Again, early in the season, I don't think there's any reason to be worried. If this was happening later in the year, then I would be sounding all sorts of alarm bells. Here, it's like, okay, you don't have to be perfect. Even if you're looking at more like process versus results, so you don't love the process and you know that there's a lot of room to improve. Like, even if they had lost, say, the Geelong and Sydney games, and they're just 2-2 right now, I would be so unconcerned. Between the talent on this team and what they've done and the effects of a shorter offseason, we're not even into the when should we start to worry conversation.
This game was bookended by a real strong amount of clearance success for the Lions, which shouldn't be a surprise. Lachie Neale racked up the numbers, 42 and 7 clearances. This was the first big stat game for him this year, but it's not like I saw him as their best. I think that once again was Hugh McCluggage, 2 goals from 26, 6 marks, 6 clearances, and 12 tackles.
I don't like when I agree with you, but yes. It's funny because last year at the end of the year, what really cost him, what cost Neale America's round low was a great run from Cam Rayner. And this year, early on, it's been Hugh McCluggage. This was really Cam Rayner's first quality game, I thought. He had done next to nothing those first 3. So it's nice to see him get back into shape. Will Ashcroft had both an awesome goal and an awesome assist. Logan Morris was pretty decent. Harris Andrews, if it wasn't for Sam Taylor, I think Harris Andrews would have the case to be the best defender right now.
Zach Bailey with 3 goals. Charlie Cameron with 3 as well. Charlie Cameron being back in form is empirically good for footy. And we did hear plenty of Lions fans singing for him.
Yes, that was awesome. It was They have 42,000. Good mix of Tigers and Lions fans, and it seemed like, it's hard to make a crowd of less than, 50-ish feel good at the G, but this felt like, and this is just going off of what we get through the screen, a really good environment. Good on both fan bases for that. I liked Jasper Fletcher in this game. He kind of steered some stuff from the back, and then some weeks, I haven't thought much of Darcy Wilmot despite his possession numbers. There's just 10 other guys that impressed me more. I liked him in this game, so that was nice to see.
I don't think there was anything revolutionary for the Lions for this game, other than, Will Ashcroft with a Jackie Chan assist. He'd already had the Jackie Chan on the inside of the boot for goal of the year. He then set up Zach Bailey with an assist that he slammed onto his cleats. So maybe this is just going to be his trademark thing.
Post Malone and Tiesto might have to change their lyrics to, now yo bitch wanna kick it, Will Ashcroft.
The Lions' experience in class shown through in the second half like you thought that it would. Positives for Richmond, Steph Campbell is much more than a back flipper or any sort of meme. I think he's probably got the most class and skill right now of any of the Richmond second-year players. 2 goals straight from 15 for him and an assist as well. He's contracted through 2026, and I wouldn't raise that alarm for most people, but he is Tasmanian. So Richmond ought to be getting to work on a longer contract for him.
Yeah, now the final expected score, Brisbane only won by a little under 4 points. But after 3 quarters, the score on the Oval was 104-62, and the expected score was 71-47. So again, I'm not concerned. But Richmond, they played hard. They didn't do anything actively stupid, I thought. They just, they got beat. If you're Richmond, you can't look at this game with a lot of regret or anger or anything. They represented themselves well and give you hope for the future. And Steely Green got a couple goals.
Green was another positive I was going to mention. Jacob Blight as well, just doing all right for himself in the air, playing as Richmond's second forward at times too, as well as their second ruck. I didn't mind him at all. And then Sam Lawler's kicking into the 50 is already looking pretty sweet. Please don't compare this guy to Dustin Martin. Let him be his own player. 2-1 and 4 assists from 24 is sick on its own.
Again, I like my comparison I gave. Better Cam Zurhaar. A more consistent, reliable Cam Zurhaar. Just had a piece of news come across the timeline. Don't go looking. Couple of key outs for any guesses who might that be?
Is it a team we've already talked about? It has to be, because you wouldn't be doing this otherwise.
Yes, it is.
You see, because I think it's going to be a team that's actually relevant, I'm going to say it's Collingwood.
It is. You totally looked already, didn't you?
No, actually, I didn't. Who is it?
It's 2 players. Any guesses?
We know that Dan Houston's going to be missing because he was suspended for something that should be worth more than 2 games because it's an action, but we know that the AFL's fucked on that regard.
You don't stop the action by punishing the outcome. You stop the action by punishing the action.
I know Jordan Tagoe was subbed out. Is he one of them?
Yep. Ankle and Achilles inflammation. Club is hopeful it'll be just 1 week.
And the other, I have no clue.
Lachie Schultz injured his hamstring at training yesterday, 2 to 3 weeks. That objectively sucks.
So no Schultz, no Houston, no Tagoe.
I was already tipping Sydney. I want to see how this moves the line and tipping, because right now 70% have Collingwood.
It's just a shame that Sydney are going to be wearing all white.
Yeah. We will talk about a very good-looking Sydney game after the break, but I'm not going to Ryan Seacrest you because, number one, I'm not a pygmy.
He's 5'8", Ethan.
Yeah, pygmy. I wanted to have some other jumper discourse. I'm surprised nobody's put out their stuff for Sir Doug Nicholls round yet, because in the last couple of years, Adelaide and a couple others were dropping them by round 2.
I wonder if some of that changed when the women's season was pushed into spring and summer. But I think another part of it is that we're getting more and more specialty jumpers for Gather Round. And I don't know how to feel about having Gather Round specialty jumpers. I like Melbourne's Flamehead. The Gold Coast Suns just look like they're totally going Miami Vice style with the pink, and I like that. I just feel like when every team is together, you really need to buy into your current identity. And if you're changing something, maybe that's a sign that your brand needs an upgrade as a whole.
If I lived in Adelaide, I'd be annoyed because, like, for example, like, when am I going to get to watch Collingwood versus Sydney? I want it to look like Collingwood versus Sydney is supposed to look. Then I'd be disappointed. But I hope, like, if people think some of these look good, bring them back a couple times, as just kind of like a cool third jersey.
Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did. How did you know that number, Ethan? Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters. Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer, no fancy software needed. It's so easy you can edit it while drunk. And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do. Best of all, it's completely free. Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
And welcome back to episode 232 of Americans Watching the Footy. I'm Ethan Castle. Find me on Twitter at Castle Media.
That's Castle with a K. I'm Benjamin Castle at BenjaminHK01. That's Castle with a K.
Brian Harambe, our executive producer, is on Instagram exclusively at Cat Named Brian. And collectively, we are on Twitter at Americans Footy, which either that brought you here or this will bring you there. I'm going to guess more often it's Twitter bringing you here, but if it goes the other way around, that would be cool too. I mean, I think just about all engagement is good engagement,
which is why we seek it out. We could totally go like a Brett Kirk route here, but I don't really want to do that, though. Brett Kirk does provide a segue as North Melbourne 8-4-52 got defeated and honestly fraught. So revenge for Luke Parker and Jacob Constanti, but this was a Swans game.
21 after a quarter, 22 at halftime, and then they really broke it open with a 45-8 third quarter, 7-1. I'm not going to go and press the panic button over North yet, and I'll get into why in a minute. But first, let's just start with the fact that Sydney is starting to round into form, figure out how Dean Cox wants them to play, and as Alistair Clarkson and the broadcasters pointed out, they did a really good job just kind of rushing their way through the corridor throughout this game.
And this is a Swans team that is still missing substantial pieces from what you consider their best 23. No Errol Golden, no matter. Braden Campbell could be a precise kick. Riley Bice, holy cow, like, does he have a special, like, GPS on his boots or something? Because his kicks have been super precise. No Tom Papley because of a cracked heel. All right, opportunities for Caden Cleary and Tom Hanley to step up, and Hanley did that definitely.
My favorite dumb comment I made about this game was, you're telling me a shrimp fried this Bice, and I guess it would have been more appropriate, you're telling me a Riley fried this Bice? He made himself known. 26 disposals, 15 marks, 9 intercepts, 5 intercept marks, 2 assists. But I think the best player in this game, and I think the coaches agreed, was Will Hayward.
For 15, 6 marks, 2 assists as well, 3 tackles. He can be the fresher forward. He can also be one of those guys that plays above his height really easily. Just a super pesky opponent, knows when to switch from defensive forward to getting on the leads. And he regularly made North's defensive decisions look incorrect.
Basically, Sydney beat North in most of the critical areas where North need players to have really good games. Charlie Comben got beat. It wasn't that he forgot how to use his hands. He just got out-muscled and beat. Brody Grundy beat Tristan Jerry. Tom McCartan totally shut down Nick Larkey until late. And if you're going to beat all 3 of those guys, you're pretty much going to beat North every time, yeah?
Pretty easy one there. Keep McCartan back. Now that McLean's back into, and what McCartan has shown, it was a nice little experiment, but this was a good reminder of where Tom McCartan belongs. By the way, somebody gave Brody Grundy 5 votes in this game, one of the coaches.
I don't think he was that good. I've seen games where Grundy's been top of the ballot material. He was good. I don't think I'd put him in my votes, But I also thought it was definitely his best game of the year. I just think there were a couple last year where it was like, oh my God, Brody Grundy, holy shit. I wouldn't quite put this in that category, but I sure did like him.
Holly Burridge was able to break it down properly. She has it on her Twitter. Awesome footy fan in general, part of the True Bloods team. Yeah, Hayward got 9, Riley by 7, clearly a 4 to 3, and Brody getting 6 had to have been a 1 and a 5.
The only one to get votes for North, Harry Sheezel, this was his best game of the year. He had a couple of like Harry Sheezel moments, and that made me happy. Because he had looked like he was playing through some injuries in the first couple of weeks. He had a pretty nice mark that could have been a Mark of the Week nominee, and instead, as you'll learn at the end of this, we had some pretty uninspiring ones this week, but he had a pretty quality mark against Ollie Florent. And yeah, Parker was solid, and I think Jacob Constanti was so fun to watch in this game because he was the one playing with more than a chip on his shoulder. I don't know what you would describe. Like, what is larger than a chip on the shoulder?
Well, it depends on what chip we're talking about. It's instead of like a Dorito, maybe he was playing with the whole Doro on his shoulder.
Oh, I was just going to say like the whole potato, even though I think it's really like, a chip, like a notch sort of in your shoulder blade, like a chipped tooth. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with he had a whole potato on his shoulder, and I'm guessing that's going to be the episode title. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Like Parker, he's going out there against his friends. He's having fun. Constanti, it's like, I never got a game with these guys. Fuck these guys.
Honestly, I was kind of scared because had he scored a goal, he might have gone into the stands and finished what he started on Callum Mills. Because remember, this is the dude that tore Callum Mills' rotator cuff.
Well, I was thinking he would just have, gone and screamed in people's faces like Mason Cox does when he scores.
Nah, this was more fire than Mason would have with ease.
Yeah, Mason is like, he's kind of goofing around when he's doing it. No, this was really personal.
This guy was a first round pick.
But the positives for North largely end there. The one other thing I'll say that went decently well, I liked how Darcy Tucker played, largely uncontested, but pretty good. It's just, you've got the makings of, like the foundation. But at the same time, like Caleb Daniel, as much as I like him, as much as I think the dog screwed up by not giving him a bunch of games, if he's the one taking kick-ins, like, yeah, he's going to get smothered or just turn a couple over. That's just kind of how he plays. I thought some of the post-game coverage, though, was like pretty harsh on these guys. It's their first bad game. They had one bad quarter against the Bulldogs. They got pretty substantially just beaten in every area by enough against the Crows, where it wasn't like, offensive to watch. The Crows were just better across the board by like a little bit in every area. Whereas this, they suck. But if you give me what North has given over the first 4 games, one very competitive loss, one loss where they just get beaten by a better team, a fun win, and one game where they shit the bed, I wouldn't be opposed. If you get to like 6 wins this year and in like, say, 12 of the 17 losses, you go out there and put up a good fight, I wouldn't consider that a failure. I would consider it a good step forward. So I don't think, as bad as this looked at times, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Now, if they do this again for a couple weeks, I think they've got the Suns out in the wine country of Adelaide this week, right?
Yeah, the Barossa.
And then round 6, they have Good Friday against Carlton, which could be hilarious in any direction. And then at Port. All right, so within these next 3 weeks, I just want to see them look competitive more. And then for some reason, they have a Thursday game against Essendon, which, I'm just never going to question. After those Dons Crows games last year, I'm not going to question like weird Thursday games.
It's nice that more teams are getting Thursdays, and North Essendon games have been usually pretty fun. There's some clear sickos potential, but also, North, I really want you to put it together. Put it together for Good Friday at least. Maybe you'll see she's all getting more to the middle again as he's finding his groove, or maybe halfback is where it's going to be right now because it looks like George Warlock could be ready to go, did well in the 2s, and know when to switch away from the man-to-man setup and have Griffin Logue be that roving extra in defense, or maybe even have Coleman switch into that at times if he's having some trouble. That was something that I think should have happened earlier for North. That along with Matt Whitlock getting over first game nerves, and Whitlock, kind of a mixed bag, some not great turnovers, but
stuff that doesn't surprise you for a first game. It's just with how that trade sequence went, expectations for him are going to be high.
And when his twin comes in for Port, those comparisons will be strong.
Also, one other like draft trade thing, Riley Bice was taken with the
pick the Swans got for Luke Parker and Jacob Constanti, yes.
Yes. Oh, and other quick note that I never mentioned, when they really pulled it apart in the third quarter, they kind of just got on top of clearances after not doing that for the first two.
That third quarter was, among other things, an Isaac Heaney flex quarter.
Yeah, it's interesting that like for the first two quarters, despite the scoreboard dominance, North was the better team in clearances. And then third quarter, Sydney kind of took care of clearances and it was like, oh, geez, now they're getting everything.
Still, more often than not, I would be happy to watch North most weeks just because I'll be learning about them and, it can't all be doom and gloom, unlike, how West Coast dealt with a lot of things or didn't against the Giants. GWS 20-12, 132, defeating West Coast 7-9-51. If I were a North fan and, they were still winless, I would feel very down because of that. Third quarter, West Coast, the first quarter is what disappointed me so much because they worked into things more in the second. They only lost the third quarter by a single point, before getting throttled at the fourth. But I don't expect this Eagles team to play a lot of good fourth quarters. I expect them to be there for first quarters, though, and they completely were not. 11 scores to 2, and the Giants should have been up by 60-something at that point rather than 29.
Basically, GWS was way faster everywhere.
Bigger, faster, and stronger, too.
Here we go.
They did take the longest strides in this game.
They also had another excellent banner. If a nice escape is what you need, we'd be happy to have you, Harley Reid. Harley was interesting this game. Played a lot more off half-back, and I had mixed feelings about it. Because the Eagles are playing so much in defense, having Harley play at half-back will allow him to get on some more runs through the middle and get more of the ball. At the same time, you do not cast him up against Toby fucking Green. I did not get some of the actual matchups that Andrew McQualter put out for this game, especially once Harry Edwards was omitted for one bad game, which honestly shouldn't be the standard. Look, you're a completely rebuilding team. You got to give guys a couple runs and a chance to respond in the ones. I would have much rather seen Harry alongside the debuting Standy Brock in this game. Instead, even though he could do decently well with his rebound kicks, he got Drax-clounced in his one-on-one against Jesse Hogan, who kicked 9 straight and had 11 score involvements from 12 disposals. He kicked 8 from his first 8 disposals before being generous to Aaron Catman in the middle of the fourth quarter. I was hoping that he would kick 10 from 10.
Put Aaron Catman on the list of disappointing goal song changes up there with Paul Curtis because I like being able to do the World of T-shirts. And now, y'all. Now I don't get to do that, so that's sad.
Also, Toby Green moving away from Macarena.
But what is his now?
Hustler by Will Sparks, Joel Fletcher, Luciana.
Don't know it.
Yeah, it's disappointing. It was at least a one free half of footy for the Giants. My question is, did the Giants make the Eagles look flat-footed because of the tsunami, or was it more that the Eagles' flat-footedness played into the tsunami?
I think, with the Harley Reid halfback thing,
it was certainly a way to get him more involved. You can't have him in a defensive matchup like that. That's not what he is.
It's just as a team, I think over the course of the year, McQualter's going to figure out what roles guys fit in better, and guys are going to be less miscast. This was also just a bad matchup, and combine that with, yes, it was against a bad team, but this was one of the best games I've seen a GWS team play. Tom Green was actually efficient. Darcy Jones played Isaac Rankin 2024 edition.
Excuse me, what do we say?
Darcy Jones in his helmet. Just the way he was running through the middle, getting clearances, and making an impact in the forward 50, he was tremendous.
By the way, Darcy Jones does not have a helmet in his Fox Footy picture for the goal, and that feels wrong.
We'll have to compare to Tristan Jarry. I'm going to guess he doesn't either.
So it'll also look wrong.
Connor Iden's impact beyond the defensive 50 was also really good in this game. He was, on a normal day, if he plays like that, he'd be in consideration for best on ground. And instead, I don't think he even cracked the coaches' votes because there were a lot of good performances. Lockie Ash, more than just volume, was kind of swerving around the back 50, setting stuff up, moving through the middle. I thought he was better than Whitfield. I thought Whitfield was fine, but I was really impressed with Lockie Ash, who at times last year I was so down on.
Lockie Ash, second best Lockie of the round?
Maybe. Also, it still blows my mind just because we've seen him with the big beard that Lockie Ash is only 23. I would have guessed that he's way, way older.
Yeah, Lockie Ash is younger than me. I wouldn't think Bailey Smith is younger than me either. Riley Philthorpe is younger than me by a couple of years.
So just as bad as West Coast was, there were a lot of good performances for GWS, and those two things can coexist. Also, I want to know, this seems like something to ask maybe for Swamp. What's the worst differential in hitouts the team's ever had in the season? Because I think the Eagles could end up rivaling that.
They were minus 16 for this one, 47-31. That's what happens when you're putting Bailey J up against Kieran Briggs.
Ooh, you know what? Was Hort a couple years ago. Could be up there too.
Ooh, good call. When they were pretty much going ruckless.
At least that was kind of they just kind of accepted it. It's all right, we really don't have an option here, so let's try to make what we can without ever getting a hit out. And they did at times. Whereas this, I don't think the plan is to not get hit outs and just be second to the ball. It's just Ailey Williams is just not good at this.
Was wanting Jack Williams to get more involved there. He did get 2 goals, which I appreciated. I mean, I could segue this into the positives for the Eagles. I mentioned more of the ball for Harley, which, yes, is a good thing. Tyrell Dewar, when he was able to be up more around half forward, had a couple good moments, another goal. He is not a good enough kick to be playing in defense. Not a good enough field kick, but in terms of shots on goal, it's better. So get what you can out of that. Liam Baker was a bit turnover prone, but he was also just put in a lot of difficult spots because that's the kind of game it was. Clay Hall should not have been omitted the week before. We've already talked about that.
There are definitely worse teams than the Eagles right now.
They just don't play in the AFL.
No, just the Eagles are the least fun to watch. And Richmond is definitely a more fun watch. North could be worse, more fun watch.
Melbourne, we can debate, especially when the Eagles match up against Carlton at the Adelaide Oval as part of that Sickos Saturday. Defensively, Ruben Jinby, for some reason, had some 1v2s a few times where there just wasn't enough support for him, but he's looking more and more like he belongs in defense. Could do a lot more in the air than I expected because his disposal, especially by hand, I've always liked. And then on debut, Tom Gross impressed me. You could go with the easy Andrew Gigash, Tom Gross has been anything but, and I did do that. But it was a goal on debut from him. Ended up getting 17 disposals, 5 clearances, which was tied with Liam Baker for most in the game for West Coast.
It's Gross, it's not gross. How do we get to that?
I'm going by the broadcasters, but he was doing more Harley Reid middle of the ground things in one game, honestly, even in less than half of the game than Harley himself had in 4 full games. So there's that. And Archer Reed can clunk some impressive marks as well. So there's another positive there, but it's going to be harder to see the individual trees when the forest is this team got shitted on. I get that it would have been tough to do anything aside from bring Oscar Allen back to try and improve the Jesse Hogan matchup. But yeah, they should have done that, for example. And to talk about the real other negatives now, 1 tackle from Tim Kelly is unacceptable, and Tom Cole is unacceptable. I don't care that he had an assist.
I legitimately went probably close to 2.5 quarters before I realized that Tom Cole was playing in this game.
Really, I thought you would have seen some negative thing from him before that.
Nope. Just did not notice. I did have a pretty fun experience watching this, by the way, because just before this game started, I took a shower. I get out of the shower. I've got this on the laptop. I've got basketball on the TV in the background. And, in the time I showered, Houston had cut Duke's lead to 8. I kind of get focused in on the Eagles game. I look up. Oh, shit. Houston's got it down to 3. I look up again, not even a minute later, a minute of real time, not clock time later. And they're shooting free throws for the lead. I managed to miss on the first go-around, Duke turning it over and then missing the free throws, and then Houston getting fouled on the rebound. It all happened very quickly. That's really my point to all of this. It all happened very quickly, and it was awesome.
Copper Flog.
I enjoyed this tremendously.
Cooper Flag is an incredibly unclutch player, by the way.
It's also like Duke has minimal experience in close games, which isn't helping them. And they've run really dumb stuff at the end of these games, taking like really low percentage shots.
Even in a percentage look at Flag did have at one point, he missed it. My housemate Dana and I have been on this the whole time. He is not a clutch player.
And that's okay. You can be a very good player without being the one to get the ball when the game's on the line. You know, you could be a good player for the first 3 quarters of a game and then turn it over to someone else.
We'll see if that's the case depending on who wins the NBA lottery.
Yes, this was very fun.
Calvin Sampson, the Houston Redemption.
Except lately it's been Houston basketball, no mercy, which is technically true when Mercy Miller, one of Master P's kids, is on the roster for Houston but didn't get in the game. Port Adelaide 10-12-72, defeated by St. Kilda 13-11-89. Saints are 3-1, and I think it's time to start taking them a little more seriously. Whereas if Port lose again this week, we could really start having some interesting conversations. If Ken Hinckley wasn't already leaving at the end of this year, he'd be in deep shit.
This was, I believe, the Saints' second win in 16 games head-to-head against Port, which makes it even more satisfying.
I really didn't see this one coming, and I'm like decently, I don't think the Saints are amazing, but I think they're solid. I just thought, oh, they're not winning at the Adelaide Oval. Port's going to go out and handle business, and instead, St. Kilda led 40-16 after a quarter when, by expected score, they were up about 10. 23-point lead at half. Port did cut that lead all the way down to 5 in the fourth quarter, but Jack Sinclair got, I guess it would be a vice captain's goal, acting captain's goal. I don't know who was in for the coin toss with Jack Steele out. And then Lance Collard got one more to put it away. Just a really fun, rewarding win for the Saints. I thought they kind of won this game in different phases, where similar to how Gold Coast beat Adelaide, the best individual performers, and the Saints had the better team performance. They did have one great individual performer in Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, though. He was awesome.
Just keeping up good performances in his home state. Yeah, the Saints are playing 3 of their first 5 games in South Australia, and they're staying over for the week here because they've got Gather Round coming up. So that's interesting.
I love what Jack Higgins said in his interview after the game.
That he doesn't care for South Australia and also just be playing Call of Duty in his room.
Yes, it was hysterical, especially with how much South Australia tourism promotion there's been.
Yeah, like the commercials with Darcy Moore and Isaac Heaney and all of that. I think Charlie Cameron as well.
It was funny.
I would love for the Saints to be able to make a huge statement this week, even before they play their game against the Giants, by locking down Nasiah while they're in his home state. Because obviously the wheels are turning. It's a contract year. He's a South Australian native. I want them to succeed in signing him long-term because he's just so much what this team needs for Rossball. And this was a very Rossball game in kind of a Rossball Mark III sort of way where he's letting the guys get loose. The list has been capable of it. And, I wasn't taking the Saints as seriously as I am now, but I knew what they were capable of. I mean, if you watched them at the end of last year, you should have seen this coming. They won 6 of 8 to end last year. So make that now 9 of 12 for them. And interestingly, 2 of those losses have been pretty severe ones against the Crows.
Of the Victorian teams, I would think the Saints and North probably get the least media attention.
Definitely the Saints right now.
So I would say there's probably a fair amount of people watching this game that kind of learned what Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller's game is about, because he was, especially in the first half as they got out to the lead, he was just everywhere. Second half, he toned it down a little, still very good. I mentioned that Port did have some really good individual performers in this game, none more so than the horny one.
Here he is again, the horny one.
I think he was the best on ground in this game, and I think the coaches agreed.
They did. They gave him the perfect 10.
They gave him the 10. I'm surprised Nasiah only got 4, though. I would have thought Nasiah 8 would have been pretty clear. And I'm surprised not to see Miles Bergman on the votes at all. Horny one, 3 goals, 28 disposals, 6 clearances, 6 marks, 6 tackles. And then Bergman, 26 disposals, 10 intercepts, 9 marks, 677 meters gained. He was big in like keeping the heat on as Port made their comeback. And even when they were getting their asses kicked in the first half, Horn Francis was ridiculous and deserves a ton of credit. He deserved better out of this game, but there wasn't a ton of help elsewhere. Underwhelming games for, I'd say, really all of Willem Drew, Kane Farrell, Jackson Mead, and Josh Sin. Alir had big numbers, ended up with 8 intercept marks, but also lost 3 of his 4 one-on-ones. And I think I've decided that the barometer for Port Ash, good first half and a bad second half, and that loss to Essendon, who had a great first half and then kind of faded.
You could say somewhat Alir, but Jace Burgoyne.
Yep, Jace Burgoyne. No, Alir's been great even in games that they've lost. He's a lot to put on a young player, but the way Port are currently playing, they need a lot out of Jace Burgoyne if they're going to reach the promised land. You know, he's only 21, but as of now, if I'm an opposing coach, he's really pivotal to the game plan. Take him out of the equation, and I like your chances.
I'm going to keep going on this point. I don't think much of what we saw for the Saints was anything new. This was just continuing to play up to the potential that we saw near the end of last year with a couple newer faces in there. Toby Travaglia got his first goal. We saw Lance Collard having some clutch moments late. That last goal, as well as 2 assists for him. Cooper Sharman did come into his own. Last year, we knew that. Anthony Caminiti is looking solid in defense, which I didn't see happening. And now that Hugo Garcia is getting consistent time, he's playing up to the expectations we had. And perhaps over these few games to start the season, Hugo Garcia is becoming a more commonly spoken name in Victorian households.
Also, a bit of a resurgence from Brad Hill. Really like the way he was kind of setting stuff up from the outside.
And later on in the game, I liked the physical defensive work from Liam Stalker. Some of it was even with the ball in hand, 8 contested possessions for him. Keep him in the defensive 50, but give him a bit of running license. Like, manage that time there during the game.
He's finally becoming the player Carlton fans said he would become.
Now, I don't think he's going to be an all-Australian, Ethan.
No, but he's been good. Now, this was not a perfect game from the Saints. In a lot of the key stats, they ended up getting beaten. I thought they did screw up one thing that seemed pretty obvious. I was a little surprised by. They had Anthony Caminiti on Mitch Georgiadis, and Cal Wilkie had Ollie Lord, which wouldn't it make sense to go the other way around there?
That did defy logic, but they fixed things in time.
And Georgiadis ended up, if it wasn't for a couple of his early misses, that could have looked really bad. He ended up with 3-2, 14 disposals and 8 marks. Now, the only way I could get behind this would be if the idea was for Wilkie to sag off of Lord and be able to give help elsewhere, which, like, sometimes you see that in basketball, you know, instead of giving the best defender their best player, you give them, like, you know, the third best guy so that he can help elsewhere. But in case you haven't noticed, and this is a pretty controversial statement, a footy oval is a lot bigger than a basketball court. So that would be kind of tough to pull off. But that surprised me. Other than that, though, I liked what St. Kilda did. I thought they found a way to make Rowan Marshall just yeeting the ball out of the middle actually work, which hasn't always been the case. You know, we've talked about this before, where sometimes he gets a bunch of clearances, just, you know, he kind of just grabs it and boots it as far as he can. And in this game, it worked because those kicks were sitting and bouncing well for someone to pick up in stride and continue pushing forward. Now, I don't know if that's like a great strategy week in, week out, but it gave us a glimpse of like, hey, this is what it looks like when Rowan Marshall's yeets are actually working.
And it's been more ruck time for him since Boyd was dropped after that first game, and we still don't have the tallest of those targets, Max King, in the picture yet, but it didn't matter. We know what Owens and Charlotte are capable of. If Collar can continue roving, he and Jack Higgins can form a pretty nice duo together as well. Good running, goal sneaks. You don't have to have the tallest to make things work, and I hope that the distribution still remains when King is back in the picture. That's a longer-term concern I have for the Saints. but they got quite the test coming up this weekend. I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be a good Norwood game, I have to think.
Both Norwood games. If I had to pick one venue to be at for Saturday and Sunday it would definitely be Norwood.
And you're going to be able to catch both of those Norwood games, Bulldogs Lions and Saints Giants, on Fox Sports 2.
I'm a little disappointed that the games out at Barassa are not on FS2, though.
You're going to bitch about the camera angles.
It can't be as bad as it was at Mount Barker, right?
Can't think so. I'm just disappointed that they're wasting Shea Bolton's first game against Richmond. Also, Port Hawthorne will obviously have some juice in it still, but the hero of the round 10 meeting last year won't be there. Darcy Byrne-Jones was indeed suspended for his elbow into Ryan Burns' head.
I guess as we talk about games being on American TV and stuff, is it time to talk about the new montage?
Yeah, we have a footy montage now. It's that same corporate metal sound as the NRL montage, but it's footy highlights, all from the 2024 finals series.
Almost all from the prelims and grand final, so way too much of the Cats-Lions prelim for my liking, but it did have the awesome Brian goal.
And the awesome Brian assist.
If you had to guess, like, who's the star player out of this, having never watched, like, without any context, you maybe would have thought, like, Ty Lohman.
Well, his 4 grand final goals were all in there, and that was a big part of it.
I am glad we have a footy montage, but the sentimental value of the 2013 Sydney Roosters shouldn't be lost.
Yeah, the new NRL montage isn't as focused either. You get a fair amount of Reece Walsh in it, but there's no, like, one team focus, I think. Again, I think it should have been a for Pete Penrith montage.
One other suspension that's coming out of Sunday comes from our final game. I did not see this one coming. Oscar Baker.
Yeah, this was a suspension that happened in the fourth quarter. It's not an incident that was really focused on live that much, but we saw Caleb Sarong getting into it with Baker after the fact because Baker caught Andrew Brayshaw with a high bump. So Baker will be missing that game against the Lions out at Norwood because we have to keep using How about the deep fried one for good measure? The score was Fremantle 15-7-97, defeating the Bulldogs 12-9-81. Dockers really asserted control with a 7-2 second quarter, led by 4 goals at the final change, and then had to sweat out things in the last, but hung on for the 16-point win. Big numbers for Caleb Sarong, 38, 15 clearances, 9 scored ball with 7 tackles, 2 assists, and 556 meters gained. While I could easily make a case for him being Frio's best, there are others in there.
Normally when a guy gets to, 38 disposals and 15 clearances, at some point during the middle of the game, you see, wow, he's up to 25 or he's had however many this quarter. And that was never really a thing with Sarong in this one. He just looked at the end and was like, whoa, he had a lot of it. But the things that stood out for me was that the Bulldogs were the better team for longer portions of this game. But that stretch where Freo was better in the second quarter, they were so much better and really just ripped the game open and seized those moments in which they were the better team. I mean, they were trailing until there were 6.5 minutes left in the second quarter. But they finished the first half on a 39-2 run.
Whoa! Where did that come from? Whoa!
All 6 of those goals coming so quickly.
This has happened at the end of a quarter to the Bulldogs before at that very same venue. I mean, at times, it felt like, bang, 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 2021 grand final. Well, Freo were just going through the middle of the ground so easily. This is where he had some game-breaking moments from guys like Michael Frederick and Shea Bolton getting out the back of things. We know what these guys are capable of, and yet still, I feel like Freddie in particular is so underrated. And also, I did not like the matchups that the Bulldogs had defensively at all in this game. Let's talk about that, because that was a real concern. Frederick versus Bailey Dale, that's a mismatch. They can both run well, but Dale can't hang with Freddie in the air.
No, he cannot. But you know what he would be if he shaved his head and had sunglasses?
Daily Dale. Then he'd have to donate a bunch of money to Florida International University
And give a speech at the United Nations.
about, I think, water.
Yes, about water conservation.
Liam Jones had his matchup shift because Josh Tracy was going all over the oval. He tried to stay deep and be that sweeper, but he couldn't hand over things as well. Then there were a couple times where he was matched up against Isaiah Dudley in the goal square, and it looked comical. And also, Dudley won those matchups.
It looked as comical as Jose Altuve standing next to Bailey Ober, who I just learned yesterday is apparently 6'9".
Well, there was a point after Dudley scored one of his goals that they looked back at the goal square, and you could basically not see Dudley because he was behind Liam Jones.
What would be like, instead of the too small, he needs to give like a too big.
I don't think anybody's ever done a too big gesture, but I love that idea. The damning stat from this game, I mentioned it at halftime, and it stayed that way. It was disposal efficiency inside 50. At halftime, the Dockers were at 70.8% disposal efficiency inside 50. That is excellent.
Now, some of that is because a lot of those in that like 6.5 minute run to close the second quarter were, they were all totally uncontested because they were basically, it was like fast break points in a basketball game, to continue with that analogy.
Up in 54.5. It was a bit of a snapback to reality, but gravity didn't completely go on them. The Bulldogs, 30.3% in the first half, 36.5% disposal efficiency inside 50 for the game. That is about 9% below their average for 2025.
I do want to give a lot of credit to a couple of Frio defenders. One played outside of his usual role, and one just played way better. Luke Ryan, who you normally think of as setting stuff up and orchestrating things from the back, did a really good job in an intercept role. And Brennan Cox, who was one of the absolute worst players back in round one. He wasn't our worst on round, was he?
No, it was Nick Haynes.
Right. But Brennan Cox and I think Corey Wagner were in consideration. Corey Wagner more so, but Brennan Cox was also very bad back in that round one game. And he was awesome. Outside of Sarong's midfield contributions, at least, it was probably the Dockers' best player. Maybe he was just their best player, period.
And Ryan did a better job helping out with some of the defensive sweeping and some patchwork and individual matchups. But the Dockers managed to win this game despite not being able to solve what is currently the unsolvable problem that is Sam Darcy. 5 goals from 21, 11 marks and 9 scored involvements. Everybody's talking about him enough already, but he still obviously has to be mentioned because while he didn't single-handedly win this game for the Dogs, he'll be doing that enough.
And he's not just doing it in the forward 50. He's a marking threat everywhere. He's been outstanding. I am having so much fun watching him. And I forgot to mention this during the GWS game discussion, so I'll mention this now. Like, Sam Taylor is dominating defense, like to the level that Tom Stewart was in 2021 and 2022, and that should be appreciated. Sam Darcy might get to that point as the dominant forward. And what's so interesting about all of this is that, again, he's not just doing it in the forward 50. He's a threat to be a contested mark anywhere, and he can be your backup ruckman. And it's kind of perplexing that at the same time, this team's tall stock hasn't always been great. This was a bit of a lesser game for Aaron Naughton, though I think he was also just defended really well. Can we talk about Tim English? Because the numbers ended up respectable in this game, but I thought Luke Jackson pretty clearly got the better of him. And there was a time a year or two ago when, it was like, is Tim English about to be the best ruckman in the world?
I mean, the conversation was, should the Eagles make the push to bring English back home on huge money? Even though he had 40 hitouts to Jackson's 30, Jackson had the more complete game. And that was in less time on ground, too, because he wasn't in for the final quarter after tweaking his hamstring. You can still easily say Luke Jackson outplayed Tim English. And credit to Josh Tracy and Pat Boss for holding their own in the ruck in the fourth quarter when it was really called for.
Yeah, English has not been, like, throughout this season, and going back to some of last year as well, hasn't been just, like, the player we thought he was capable of being. And that's disappointing because when he's on, it's really fun to watch, and it's definitely hurt the Bulldogs.
Pacing in this game, I think, was really interesting. We measured that the Dockers were able to get on really fast rebounds and convert from clearances. The Bulldogs ended up ahead in disposals, plus 30 in kicks, plus 19 inside 50s, plus 12 in the free kick count. They won the clearance battle, plus 11 in marks. You think by that, as Ethan said, this should be a game that the Bulldogs controlled. Instead, it was Fremantle's faster passages and just being so decisive there when they got those opportunities in the middle quarters that stick with you. Interestingly enough, though, in the fourth quarter, Fremantle did start shying away from that. We thought that they were getting in trouble in terms of their interchanges, but that was a glitch. But they did start slowing things down a lot. Some of the fatigue might have been showing. At the end, they did see out the game well, just being willing to see the defensive boundary and force stoppages. And then a really mature ending for Murphy Reed, who made opportunities for himself and got the late reward. Reed with a goal from 16 and 2 assists. That goal was the very last one after he got around Bailey Dale and pressured Harvey Gallagher to force a forward 50 throw, and it basically ended the game. He put the icing on it with the goal at the end, and that was super satisfying. And yet, he did not get the Rising Star nod this week. That instead was Levi Ashcroft for his 1 goal 2 from 22.
I mean, Murphy Reed's going to get his, but I'm a little surprised he hasn't yet, because, like, how many more times is Levi Ashcroft going to put up a worthy performance? Probably a lot.
Like, I'm not sure if it's time, like, to break out the Murphy Reed plays highlight or whatever, but maybe after another week. And he should have plenty of opportunity this week in Gather Round because Sam Lawler's already gotten his.
But basically, we see this game the same way, right? Where, like,
we depressingly agree on a lot of things.
Where, like, basically, it was that during the stretches, the Dockers were better. They were way better. And shout out to Brennan Cox for holding down the fort and making sure that it didn't collapse in the prolonged periods in which the Dockers were the superior team.
And thinking back, just one big sliding doors moment, when the Bulldogs did kick the first 2 goals after halftime, I thought that there could have been something there. But then at 11-point miss, Naughton was able to play on, had a clean line of sight, and just missed this shot. The response came from Jai Larson, Amos, and it was mostly goal for goal from there. Whereas had Naughton hit that, we could have been talking about this second half very, very differently.
Also, how great do the Bulldogs clash jumper look?
I mean, a lot of things are going to look good against purple. Like Frio Cindy is a very good clash, for example, but the Bulldogs clash is just one way to remind us that white clashes should be mandatory.
Note that in like a couple of the images when they had released this, it was with blue pants and it looked nowhere near as good. With the white pants, this is an obvious winner.
It is awards time as we finish up round 4 here. Your round 3 mark of the week, it surprised us both. I thought it would be Mitch Georgiadis. Ethan picked Harley Reid. The winner ended up being Caleb Smith with a knee to Jack Higgins' back. Kind of propelled himself backward, ended up being pretty flat as he took the mark, but I thought that was a lesser winner. Your nominees this round are a bit of a surprise. We didn't see Reece Stanley in there, but Tom DeKoning took one over Rody Majacek. Christian Salem's intercept mark was more impressive because he flipped over Patrick Dangerfield after the grab. And Sam Davidson got one from Sam Darcy going back with the flight. I remember that one as like, ooh, that's more of an American football type grab. Where are you going here, Ethan?
First off, Reece Stanley's to set up his goal should have probably been in the mix here. And then both Ollie Dempsey and Mitch Georgiadis had almost insane marks.
Shea Bolton had one too where he had this great climb.
I guess I'll go with Tom DeKoning, but none of these will be remembered on Brownlow night.
Salem's looks more impressive, but only because of what happens after DeKoning gets my vote.
Goal of the week, round 3. It was Will Day picking up a Josh Weddle spoil and then kicking a centering ball from 60 meters that ended up just kind of taking a couple of crazy bounces to get in.
That I thought was clubhouse leader, and then this week happened.
I liked Mitch Owens' better last week, and remember the opening round goal? Probably that one was really good. Which Hawthorne player? Was that also Day?
I think it was.
Yeah, your round 4 nominees. We've got Will Ashcroft taking a Dane Zorko handball in the right pocket and kicking on 2 bounces. Braden Campbell receiving A Will Hayward handball, bouncing and kicking from just inside the center square. Fuck, I can't believe that. And James Harms chasing down a Lockie McNeil kick in the right pocket and then kicking from the boundary. I would think Ashcroft is going to get the nod here, but I sure like the James Harms one too. Campbell's was not bad, it's just not up to the level of the others.
Croft versus Harms is a fun debate, and I think I'm going to side with Ashcroft here just by a tad. Last week's behind of the week for round 3, that was a Cam Rayner poster after a nice crumb and run. Your clear winner for round 4 was this absolute blast from Mac Andrew from the center square, which probably would have beat out Braden Campbell for the goal of the week nominee had he not doinked the post 3/4 of the way up. Everything Mac Andrew does is fun to watch, whether or not he succeeds.
Round 3, your assist of the week was Zach Jones handballing through a tackle to Darcy Wilson. We've got some really good ones this week. We've got Riley Bice bouncing his way down the left wing and then kicking across his body to Tom Hanley. Got Isaac Heaney with a perfect chip to Tom Hanley after he ran through a stoppage. But I think there's a pretty obvious winner, and this could end up being in the conversation for assist of the year. Will Ashcroft, he smothered a Luke Trainer kick, and then Jackie Chan'd it to Zach Bailey. Like I said she's too young, don't want no man. So she gonna call her friends, now that's the plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Will Ashcroft.
Will Ashcroft and Jackie Chan kicks just might be his thing. Worst on round. This can't be a player who got hurt or subbed off. And speaking of hurt, we're finding out as we're recording that Luke Jackson will be missing this week against Richmond.
That's not surprising at all.
Worst on round, though, your round 3 winner was Oscar Allen, and it's going to be another Eagle this time, but back to defense, it's Tom Cole. We talked about him earlier. I'm, again, surprised that Ethan didn't notice him for a lot of the game because he made just so many errors in his 11 disposals. Like, get him out and get Harry Edwards back and have more of a tall look and give Sandy Brock another opportunity to actually play alongside him, be the second tall, because anything at this point is better than Cole, and Edwards never should have been dropped.
Yeah, the Eagles are not in the position where they should be dropping a guy after just one bad game, especially a young guy. Main character last week was super fun. It was Saad El-Hawley. This week, I guess we got to give it to the Suns Crows umpires between the Butterick taking Rowell's free kick, the Jed Walter playing on, the Rankin mark, and the AFL actually coming out and saying, yeah, we fucked that up.
And because it's the Crows, it just makes it all the more unbelievable. But it's all right. Now the Crows can take out their anger on, the Long.
This could be interesting. I think most Cats fans are not going into this expecting a win, but I don't think we'd be stunned by any outcome. Should be a darn good game. A kickoff. Gather round. Also, I guess Jesse Hogan gets an honorable mention for main character because he kicked 9.
Yeah, he can't win this one. I'm sorry.
No, especially being in like one of the least ballyhooed games of the round.
Ballyhooed, that's a good word choice from you. Didn't expect it.
Real quick, forgot to mention that Rory Lobb is totally taking on the role of being like a pro wrestling villain. A lobster on the back of his head was great. He's totally leaning into the identity and just being a goofball and having fun with being the bad guy. And that's good. You know, if you're gonna be a villain, you have 2 choices. Try to like rehabilitate your image or embrace being the villain and have fun. And Rory Lobb is clearly embracing it and having a good time with it. And I highly recommend that.
What other players should dye animals or things into their hair?
I mean, it doesn't have to be dyed hair. It just has to be like, just lean into the identity. I think Mason Cox could do some more silly stuff. I think Peter Laddams totally could. After watching that awful shank by Laddams on Saturday night, which was one of the highlights of that game, I decided he's just a fun player to hate. I'm sure if I met Peter Laddams, I would not think like, oh, you're a bad person. I think he's just like perfect to have in this villain heel role, and he's totally leaning into it in the best way. And just, look, he's a not very good player, but he's provided some value. The Swans have found a good way to utilize him as of now. And for him to have a moment like that where he has one of the worst kicks I've ever seen, like, that's fun. He's playing into it.
I'm sure we'll be talking more about both those players on our socials at Americans Footy. And as we figure out also who else should put things into their hair, yeah, like a a rooster design for Mason Cox would be perfect. But that'll be all over at Americans Footy. I'm at Benjamin HK01.
I'm at Castle Media. Ryan Harambe is sleeping on the corner of my bed instead of taking his half out of the middle like he usually does. He is on Instagram at CatNameDryan. And next weekend, we'll actually get to probably record in person, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it'll just be a brief excursion back up to the bay for me for the start of Passover and a couple other things. So until then, enjoy for everything that it is and good time of day.